This is the story of the Roaring 50's. King Television is proud to present this 10-year review of the greatest decade in the history of unlimited hydroplanes. These were the years that the Rooster Tails came west, when Seattle truly became the hotbed of hydroplanes, when new faces, new boats, and a million new fans transformed a rich man's hobby into a major spectator sport. Tonight, King TV goes back into its film archives to relive the exciting years since 1950 and to pay an informal tribute to the daredevil drivers, the colorful and competitive owners, and finally to the imaginative boat designers who provided them with the most thrilling of all water vehicles, the modern unlimited hydroplane. This is their story, the story of the Roaring 50's. Your hosts for tonight's program will be Rod Belcher, King TV's sports director, and Ted Jones, boat designer, boat builder, and hydroplane pilot, without whose ideas and exploits this story might never have happened.
A new era dawned in the half-century-old history of hydroplane racing in the year 1950. The leading role in that thrilling sports drama was played by a lady with a most unladylike name of Slow Motion 4. This was the boat with which Ted Jones and the late Stanley S. Sayers revolutionized hydroplane racing and transferred the Rooster Tail capital of the world from Detroit to Seattle. The gallant old lady, as she came to be called, is really the star of our show. But to tell you more about her, I'd like to introduce the man who designed her and who drove her to victory in the Gold Cup race of 1950, Ted Jones. I'd like to say right here that it's a pleasure to welcome you viewers to our review of hydroplane racing. And Ted, welcome to the Roaring 50's, which incidentally has nothing to do with Miss Provine and dancing the Charleston and all that stuff from the Roaring 20's.
Pleasure to be here, Rod.
Now, we've already introduced the gallant old lady, and now we'd like you to tell us how she came into existence, how she differed from other preceding unlimited hydros.
Well, the Slow Motion 4 was actually the big sister of a smaller boat that I had designed and built carrying the same name before the name was famous, and it was a 3.225.
Was that the 3 then, the Slow-Mo 3?
This was the Slow-Mo 3, and she was the forerunner of the Slow-Mo 4 and 5, a prop riding three-pointer.
Now, we have a diagram here, and I'd like you to show simply what it was that gave the slow-mos that added get up and go that made them world famous, okay?
Yes, sir. And the older type boat, even in the three-pointer, like you saw the Tempo's run, had the engine and driver aft and the sponsons very short, and it rode heavy on its tail and wetted a lot of area. I took the engine and driver, moved it forward, lengthened out the sponson to put the CG directly in the center of the boat, and allowed the boat to ride on its propeller only in the stern and its two sponsons forward. And this is what made the boat move, this flow of air that runs underneath the boat at high speed.
Well, let's get something straight. Are you the inventor of this style of boat?
No, I like to have it on record now that I didn't invent the three-point boat. Early in 1911, the French people built three-pointers and multiple-point boats, and actually, what I did was change them to get some air under them, and with the advent of the later engines with more power and lighter weight, it was a simpler job than the French people had.
So you, in effect, kind of lifted the boat up out of the water where it could function right and could really move.
Right.
And move she did. From the minute she went into the water on Lake Washington in October of 1949, the Slow Motion 4 was a bomb. An unheralded bomb which was due to set the world of hydroplaning on its ear. But we're getting a little bit ahead of our story, and in order to tell the story of the Roaring 50's properly, it makes sense to review the years of unlimited hydroplaning which preceded the Golden Decade. Now, actually, the following summary of the Gold Cup class from 1904 until the advent of Ted Jones and the Slow-Mos in 1950 should answer some historic questions and correct a few misconceptions about the hydroplane sport. Now, really, it all got started back in 1904, Teddy Roosevelt was president then. Honus Wagner led the National League in batting, and Army beat Navy 11-0 in their annual football classic. And on the waters of Long Island Sound, 3 clumsy-looking powerboats lined up for the first Gold Cup race. A race put together by the American Powerboat Association, which had just organized the year before. Now, by today's standards, the entries were weird-appearing, narrow, and long vessels. Ted Jones calls them pencils. They were what are known as displacement boats, boats which ride down in the water, not over the top of it. And when that first race ended, C.C. Rioty's boat, the Standard, came in first with a top heat speed of, get this, 23.6 miles per hour. Though the first Harmsworth Trophy race had been run a year earlier off the coast of Ireland, this 3-boat Gold Cup race introduced so-called unlimited hydroplaning to the United States. Actually, the hassles and rhubarbs which have marked recent years of hydroplane racing are not new to the sport. As a matter of fact, the first 5 Gold Cup races were run on a basis of handicap rules, which were tougher to figure than bonus points. In 1906, the boat which finished 5th won. In 1907, the next to slowest boat took the title on handicap. Obviously, the rule makers had to do something about that. Well, in 1910, Americans got their first look at a hydroplane when the British Challenger, a boat named the Pioneer, made its debut in this country. The hydroplane principle basically lifted the displacement boats up out of the water so that they operated on top of it. The reduced drag increased speed, and by the 1914 Gold Cup race, the conventional step hydroplane was king of the waters. Baby Speed Demon 2 posting a speed of 50.4 to win the race. Now, up until this time, hydroplaning was strictly an Eastern-dominated sport. Then, in 1915, as Seattle would do 35 years later, Detroit decided to get in on the act. With a small group of civic-minded citizens leading the way, the Miss Detroit, built by Chris Smith of Chris Craft fame, was entered in the famous classic and won it. That started the long domination of Gold Cup racing by the Motor City. It was also the prelude to the Garwood era. The Babe Ruth of hydroplaning, Garwood won an unequaled 5 straight Gold Cups from 1917 through 1921. His adaptation of World War I Liberty airplane engines to racing boats revolutionized the sport so completely that some rather short-sighted measures were taken to stop him. When he put 2 Liberties in his Miss America, he completely ran away from the pack in the 1921 race and set a heat speed record of 70 miles per hour, which was to stand for a quarter of a century. So completely did he dominate the sport that the rules makers revised the regulations to limit power and ban hydroplanes, returning the sport, as they put it, to practical gentlemen and displacement boats. Obviously, the Gold Cup suffered a setback. Speeds dropped way down, and the beefs still continue. In 1924, for instance, the Rainbow 4 came in first and was disqualified when the judges ruled that she was really a hydroplane. Then things went from bad to worse, and the 1927 race capped off a really bad period for the sport. That year, the Greenwich Folly won the Gold Cup in a confusing afternoon, which saw 2 boats capsize, 3 disintegrate, 1 stopped by driftwood, 3 conk out due to mechanical failure, and only 2 of the 11 starters actually finished the race. Well, that was enough even for the Rules Committee. That year, they restored the hydroplane to favor. They canceled the 1928 race so that the designers could get the boats up to proper condition for the next year's race.
It aids very materially in the steering of the boat.
Yes, this is very much
One-hand control.
I operate my...
And you hold on with the other hand to keep them going overboard.
That's very necessary.
Maybe it was the Depression, maybe just lack of imagination. But the 1930s, as far as hydroplaning was concerned, were marked by relatively unspectacular performances. Boats were largely rebuilds and remodels, hardly comparable to today's speed demons. The El Lagarto, the only boat to win 3 straight Gold Cup races, 1933, 34, and 35, was the former Miss Mary, which was just about the slowest boat in the 1922 Gold Cup Classic. Meanwhile, big boat owners were chagrined to see outboards and smaller inboards achieving speeds comparable to the so-called unlimiteds. Certainly, something had to be done.
The diesel can ship so much water that her stern rail was almost awash. See. And now let's have a look at the winners, Garfield A. Wood and Orland Johnson.
Well, Orland, that is the hardest race I think we ever run. And it worked out just the way we had it planned, didn't it?
Sure did.
A hint of things to come occurred in 1939 when owner-driver Zalman Simmons Jr. showed up on the Detroit River in his My Sin, the first of the modern three-point unlimited hydroplanes. It appeared obvious that only the war prevented a real breakthrough in boat design in the 1940s. Like so many other diversions and non-essential activities, the Gold Cup, too, went into mothballs for the duration. PT boats, destroyer escorts, and carriers replaced the racing fleet in interest and in purpose. Then, when the war ended, hydroplaning bounced back with revived interest. For instance, a field of 17 boats, the largest in the history of the sport up to that time, entered the 1946 Gold Cup race. And orchestra leader Guy Lombardo didn't disappoint the spectators lining the Detroit River as he piloted his Tempo 6 to victory. And in winning that race, Guy finally beat the 25-year-old speed mark established by Garwood back in 1922.
Well, naturally, I felt very good about winning the Gold Cup, and I knew that Garwood had a record that had been standing for 26 years. His average was 70 miles an hour for the 90s. It was something I was aiming for, and naturally, when I broke his record and won the Gold Cup, I might add that that was the happiest moment of my life. I would say this, that not only driving and winning a boat race is important to us. We help in the design of the boat, and that's like helping design an orchestration that becomes a big hit record. There's sort of a personal pride in the fact that you helped build the machine that did the job. I'm sure that in the future, jets are going to be the race boat engine as they're going to be the car engine and the airplane engine. At the present time, our jet boats are not easy to start and they're not easy to stop. So in the immediate future, I do not see jets in the Gold Cup. 8 or 10 years from now, when we can start them quickly, I mean by that accelerate quickly and deaccelerate quickly, I think the jet will come into its own.
But, of course, the jets are another story, and we'll cover that later. But Guy Lombardo, back in 1946, helped set the watery stage for a new era in speedboating. Detroit boats won the 1947, 48, and 49 races. But Detroit owners and drivers were totally oblivious to a new challenge that was being readied for them from the far west.
Little did we know the challenge would come from Seattle's Lake Washington. Even the natives didn't suspect it. Just a little item in the paper like this. Another speedboat running against the clock. So what? Now see the contrast. Full pages of exciting sports copy within a few months. A great new sport was born, a game which was to prove one of the biggest stories in Pacific Northwest history.
This chapter in the hydroplane story began in the early days of World War II. Ted Jones was meandering about Lake Washington in his 225 cubic inch hydroplane. And, well, you're here, Ted. Why don't you tell about that?
Fine. I was 20 years younger then, and I was out hydroplaning one afternoon, and I saw another 225, which was unusual on Lake Washington at that time. So I caught up with it and motioned the driver into a bit of competition. My boat was considerably faster, and I beat him. And a little while later, we're at the dock, and he said he had a boat there, and it was called Slow Motion the Second. This man said, "What can you do to this boat to make it go as fast as yours?" And this man was Stan Sayers, and that's how I met him.
That was Stan. Well, it was this chance meeting on Lake Washington which actually brought about the Roaring 50s. Ted Jones did convert that early laggard slow-mo into a speedster. Later, he entered into an agreement with Sayers to build him another 225 that would be capable of world speed records. That boat was the Slow-Mo 3, the little sister of the Unlimiteds we all know so well. The success of the 3, which did attain world record speeds, was the incentive which caused the team of Jones and Sayers to get together on an even more ambitious project, that of building an Unlimited which would not only win the fabled Gold Cup, but set new speed records as well. So Jones produced the plans for a prop-riding three-pointer. Then he and Sayers looked around for a builder who could turn those plans into reality. They found him in Anchor Jensen.
Decided that the boat would be built by us and designed by Ted, and that we would all go back to the 1948 Gold Cup and see what they're running back there before I made any definite commitments. We finished the boat and made the test runs with it and that. I wanted to give her more speed and just couldn't hold on, so we had a slight confusion about who was steering the boat for a while, but after that we got going, and we had a pretty good ride. The first ride was over 120 miles an hour.
The launching of the 4 in October of 1949 was an inauspicious event. No champagne, no brass band. And when the boat made ready to try for the world speed record on June 26th the next year, there was still only minimal interest in the area where rowing shells had always been the king of racing craft. Virtually unheralded, the big new hydroplane made 2 record runs over a measured mile course off Sand Point. Not only did the Slow-Mo set a new world's record at 160.323 miles per hour, but she was 19 miles an hour faster than the previous record holder, Sir Malcolm Campbell. This was the triumph Sayers and Jones had been looking for, and immediately plans were made to go after the big prize in unlimited hydroplaning, the Gold Cup. Well, this was the period in local history when Greater Seattle Incorporated, the civic promotion organization, first came into being. Seattle's Summer Water Festival, known as Seafair, was created, and officials of the group were trying to decide on a spectacular bit of water competition to spark up the show. A gigantic Seafair crew race was the idea of many, but the advent of the Slow-Mo onto the scene gave them a second choice. Finally, Greater Seattle decided to go along with the unlimited hydroplanes, a decision which ultimately worked to the advantage of both Seattle and boat racing. A civic promotion got underway, spearheaded by such men as Jerry Bryant, Walter Van Camp, George Gunn, and a publicity specialist named Guy Williams. Backed by this kind of civic interest, owner Stan Sayers committed his boat to the Detroit Classic, and for the first time, the Slow-Mo 4 was off to the competitive wars. Detroiters were either unaware of the Slow-Mo's potential or disregarded her as a threat to their Gold Cup domination. Now, this is what this magazine, Yachting, had to say about the situation.
When Slow-Mo appeared at the Chrysler Boatwell, she was not highly regarded by regatta fans. It was true she had bumped the world speed record, but probably she was just a mile trial freak, wouldn't be able to turn, likely to come unglued during the first lap. Owner Sayers, designer, driver Jones, builder Jensen, and her enthusiastic amateur crew were swell guys. But it took years of Gold Cup experience to weld a combination that could win. At least it would be interesting to see her run while she lasted.
The dean of all hydroplane racers, Gar Wood, also had something to say about Jones' designed boat and the potential of the Slow-Mo.
Well, Jones's boat was a very sensational thing with the tailwater and one thing and another, and the speed was really something, much faster than the boats that we had built. But of course, I was not very much in sympathy with that type of boat because I don't like the tailwater, and we always built boats that were qualified for the harmless race as the rules provided at the time we raced. I think Jones should be given a lot of credit for his designs. He's brought along some really high-speed boats. I wouldn't want to ride in one, but I think they're a little tricky. It shakes your head too much. I wouldn't want to ride in them at all.
Well, obviously, Mr. Wood and the Detroit fans were bitterly disappointed in the way the Slow-Mo performed. Not only was the boat able to turn, but Anchor Jensen had seen to it that she stayed glued together. When the race was over, The slow motion 4 was the new champ with a perfect score of 2,000 points. She had won all 3 heats from the best Detroit and the East had to offer. The Slow-Mo 4 returned to Seattle in triumph, the World Champ and the Gold Cup champ. Now, for the first time in the history of that famous event, the Gold Cup site would move west of Minneapolis. It would be the responsibility of the Seattle Yacht Club to arrange for and host the 1951 competition. Now, putting on a Gold Cup race is no simple task, but Yacht Club members, Greater Seattle workers, and literally hundreds of local volunteers accepted the challenge. The south end of Lake Washington provided an ideal setting for the race, with the floating bridge serving as a breakwater and the park-like shores offering vantage points for thousands of spectators. The Coast Guard accepted the responsibility of marking the course and patrolling the waters. Volunteer union crews operated the huge pit cranes. The police took on the gigantic job of getting traffic to and from the site, and of course the park department was ever on hand to clean up after the litter bugs. Official barges, press barges, log booms, starting devices, and countless other details were accounted for. Seattle was ready for its first Gold Cup race on August 4th, 1951.
This race marked the debut of the second half of the Gold Cup Twins, the Slow-Mo 5, and I was the driver. So I qualified the boat for the race at 91 miles an hour. Lou Fagel qualified Slow-Mo 4 at 90 miles an hour, and we had 2 boats into the race. Then we had to do something spectacular, so we decided to make a flying start under the bridge. And
we have a diagram here, Ted. I think you can explain from that.
Yes, here is the floating bridge, and this is the old race course as it was back in 1951, with the pits considerably further north.
We can show how that new race course sits here by comparison.
It's some quarter of a mile further south, a slightly different angle with the pits here.
Mm-hmm.
And Lou and I found a small white house with a tall peaked roof back here about a quarter of a mile north of the bridge, and we used that for our starting point. And we would floorboard both boats side by side. And by the time we got to the bridge, we're doing roughly 145 miles an hour and around 155 to 160 at the starting line. And this gave us the edge getting into the first turn first.
Well, the flying start caught the Detroit contingent unaware, but it took more than that to keep the Gold Cup in Seattle. Lou Fagel and Ted Jones both drove good races, with Fagel in the 5 having the hottest boat of the day. He had won both the first and second heats when tragedy struck. One of the boats entered in the race was the Quicksilver, owned and driven by Orth Mathiot of Portland. In the third lap of the final heat, the Quicksilver roared by the official barge, galloping wildly and pitching her 2-man crew back and forth in the cockpit. The huge crowd, sensing trouble, rose to its feet as wilder and wilder the boat jumped as she roared toward the south turn. Then, like a rock skipped on the water, the Quicksilver made her final leap. As her bow came down, she tripped and barrel rolled amid an enormous geyser of water. That was it. The crowd hushed as tragedy was evident. Both Mathiot and mechanic Tom Whitaker lost their lives strapped into the Quicksilver with safety belts. The race was suspended then, and the Slow-Mo 5 was awarded the cup on the basis of her performance in the first 2 heats. These were the glory days of the Slow-Mos. Not only did the 4 win the 5 and the 5 take turns to keep the Gold Cup in Seattle, but the 4 increased her world record mile run to 178.497 miles an hour in 1952. In that same year, it was the 4, the gallant old lady, who kept the Gold Cup string alive with Stan Dollar at the wheel. A year later, Lou Fagel and Joe Taggart teamed up in the 4 to fight off the Detroit Challenge. In 1954, it was Fagel again, this time in the Slow-Mo 5, who roared to 3 straight heat victories for a perfect score of 2,000 points. Joe Taggart in the limping 4 was given considerable credit for his teamwork driving that day, but Fagel was in complete control. One Seattle writer described the artistry of his driving with a phrase, like Heifetz with a fiddle. This, of course, was the last great year for the 2 Sayers boats, but they bowed out dramatically in the 1955 race, which saw the Gold Cup return to Detroit by way of a statistical victory. This was the race in which Joe Taggart had 400 bonus points for a record-breaking heat performance in his hip pocket. only to go dead in the water, a common phrase in racing circles. Actually, it's marked the end of the gallant old lady as a winner, even though she would race again. In the meantime, 2 other boats, the Miss Thriftway and Detroit's Gale 5, became the center of the sport's greatest beef since the Rainbow was disqualified in 1924. With 4 out of the race, Bill Munsey and an upcoming Seattle favorite, Miss Thriftway, zipped home to win the final heat. It was a joyous conclusion to Seafair, as slow-mo fans and other home folks were glad that, well, as far as they knew, the winner was still a local boat. Even though King TV cautioned that the victory was still in doubt because of the elapsed time factor, Bill Munsey was acclaimed the new champion.
This is what I wrote in the morning PI the next day. Nobody paid any attention to a little knot of worried men furiously manipulating pens and pencils on the officials' barge. They were the faithful timers. Deadpan officials checked and rechecked the figures. And then the official announcement came. The winner, Gale 5. Man, it was the greatest letdown since the phony armistice in the First World War.
It wasn't a letdown, though, for Gale 5 winning driver Lee Shana.
Our stopwatches and our figuring was not close enough to really decide, and we waited naturally for the official decision, and I think as many people would remember, it was something like about 4.5 seconds difference after 90 miles of racing. Since then, the rules have been changed, and there is no more bonus points for the fastest heat, but there still is bonus points for the fastest Gold Cup race, that is in the Gold Cup only. The winning boat with the fastest time gets 400 points, second place 300, third place 225, and so on, just like the points for each heat. If that rule would have been in effect in 1955, Thriftway would have won the race because she would have received 300 points for the second fastest time. We would have received 400 points for the fastest, but I am pretty sure Thriftway would have been the winner.
To say the least, Bill Munsey, Willard Rhodes, and several 100,000 Puget Sounders were shocked, then dismayed, then furious. The Detroit-Seattle rivalry had finally blossomed into a real live feud, which was due to get worse before it got better. But while the race ended discouragingly for Seattle fans, they still had plenty to talk about. Primarily, there was the famous flip for the Slow-Mo 5, one of the most thrilling, hair-raising episodes in the history of the sport. The reason Seattle was represented by only one slow-mo in the 55 race was because during time trial week, the 5 had decided to make like an airplane. With Lou Fagel at the wheel, the 5 was making her qualifying run. As she roared down the backstretch at a speed of 160 miles an hour, there she finally takes to the air. But I guess we'll better let technician Ted Jones describe what happened there.
Well, just prior to this qualifying run, someone had installed 1.5-inch high strips, thwartship across the forward deck. They gave the boat additional lift. They assumed that it would discourage any lift. However, at 160 miles an hour, these strips became airfoils, and the boat merely got airborne like an airplane and did a 360 and came back on its bottom, fortunately.
Well, so that we can all see that famous flip a little better, how about running that film again, slowed down this time. Here it goes, Ted.
We watch it go from sponson to sponson, rocking a little bit higher each time, and finally gets to a point where the air pressure under it and the lift on the deck is great enough to flip it. It's as simple as that. Only I have never seen this happen before, and it was quite a shock.
Well, I guess we are likely not to see it again.
Isn't that something?
It came down and went running off just like that. Well, both slow-mos were to race again, but this was really the end of the victory road for them. In 5 years, they had created a new major sports interest in the Pacific Northwest, thrilled literally millions of fans, and gave zest to Seattle's summer festival, the Seafair. They provided, to say the least, one of the most colorful chapters in the history of hydroplaning. While the glory days of the slow-mos were colorful, the next 5 years were certainly not devoid of glamour, thrills, and excitement. New faces, new races, new boats were on the scene. Emerging were such drivers as Colonel Rush Schley, shown here with his famous plumber's helper. The latter, a retort to columnist Emmett Watson, who had referred to the new crop of hydro drivers as a bunch of plumbers. There was Miro Slovak, the flying Czech who had escaped dramatically from behind the Iron Curtain. There was rancher Bill Stead, milkman Bill Brow, National Guard pilot Dallas Sartz, and a young man with a heavy throttle foot, Norm Evans. It was Evans, incidentally, who almost duplicated Lou Fagell's notorious flip in the Slow-Mo 5. In 1956, Evans drove the rebuilt 5, then the Miss Seattle in another airborne maneuver, at almost the exact spot where the flip had occurred. There it is. But miraculously, as you see, the boat settled down and completed the lap. There were still a few old-timers around, too. There was Bill Cantrell, an aging veteran of race driving, a man who thrilled the fans at more than one Seattle race. The 1954 Gold Cup in particular. That was the year in which the Detroit contingent decided to do something about the flying start. So the visitors teamed up to maneuver in front of the bridge opening to thwart the mad dash of the Moes. While participating in these strictly legal shenanigans, Cantrell suddenly found himself without steering control, and the big Gale 4 headed for the shore. Cantrell was helpless to change her course, so he simply rode her in, up over a seawall, and of all places, into the Rose Garden at the home of Dr. and Mrs. F.A. Black.
The day before, we had been trying to rudder out on the left side of the 5, and it was working real good. So the night before the race, after everybody left, we switched the rudder from the right side to the left side on the 4. And being in a hurry and trying to get the job done, and as quiet as we could, we forgot to put the rudder stop on. And when I went into turn up there to make the run for the gun, I cranked it hard over to the left to make my left turn. As the harder I turned to the left, it started to turn to the right. And of course, running pretty good before I realized what was happening, I was headed for the beach. And there's nothing I could do about it then, only just shut it off and wait. It happened so that it lost enough speed to drop its tail down. When it did, it catapulted over the rock wall and into the rock garden up there, and the people were out on a lawn party there watching the race, and they asked me if I was hurt, but I said, no, I'm not hurt, but I'm most embarrassed. I thought maybe that I'd gotten on someone, but I was most embarrassed.
Bill, getting back to that other little incident that made you stick around Seattle for a while back in 1952.
I went along slow-mo over there and got a little water in the carburetor, and she backfired on me. When it did, it ignited. It just set it off, and it was a flash explosion. And, of course, we found out later that it did have a rupture in the gas tank, and it was leaking continuously all the time that I was running. And that's what made the big fire. And I got a flash from it, a burn, and I tried to get out overboard, go over the side, and my hip got cut on the steering wheel, and I had to ride it another probably half a second longer, but it seemed like eternity before I could get out of it. I was picked up by the Coast Guard boats, and I say that the most pleasant days I've ever spent in my life was in the hospital. I really enjoyed it, and the people were fine. I had a lot of friends that come and visit me. I was always had a lot of friends up there that came up to visit me, never lonesome at all.
Another veteran was Joe Taggart of the Fagell Taggart team. Taggart almost succeeded in extending the victory life of the Slow-Mos when he pushed the 4 to a substantial point lead in the Seattle Seafair Trophy race of 1956. Again, the tired old lady had a bad moment, but she gallantly rallied for Taggart, and they managed to finish second to Rush Schley and Shank. That was the race in which Scooter 2 sank for the 6th time to earn the somewhat uncomplimentary name, the Submarine. Jack Regis, another young driver with a successful but somewhat tragic future, got all wet in the process. Meanwhile, the 1956 Gold Cup was run on the Detroit River, and the point mix-up in Seattle the previous year couldn't hold a candle to the beefs and bellyaches which followed the 56 affair. This was the race in which Bill Muncy and the nifty Thrifty supposedly hit a buoy here on the 7th lap of the final heat. That was it, and as a result, the Cup was held up. This was the race, too, in which King TV participated in more than a broadcasting capacity, for it was the recording of King's telecast which later convinced the officials that Muncy did not hit the buoy, and the Gold Cup should rightfully be his. Well, confusion reigned for weeks. Seattle folks were rightly indignant. Ultimately, though, they were to rejoice with the Thriftway camp when the final decision was made. There was no rejoicing, however, when Slow-Mo 4 came home from her final race. During a warm-up session on the Detroit course, Joe Taggart had taken the old lady out for a test run. As he roared down the straightaway, he hit the wake of a non-racing craft, and the Slow-Mo was demolished.
just hit this wave in the exact right moment. I don't imagine I could have gone back and tried 1,000 times and repeated on it, but it just caught me in the right position that threw the boat up in the air in such an attitude that when it came down, the rounded part of the nose turned the boat sideways, and I can still remember the 2 policemen looking back at me as I was going over.
Taggart luckily escaped fatal injury, but for the Slow-Mo 4, the end had finally come. As she returned to Seattle, her reaction was dramatic to the point of pathos. Hydro fans actually shed tears as the wrecked hull came home to her final resting place. Hottest boat of the 1957 hydro campaign was the rose and pink Hawaii Kai, owned by Edgar Kaiser and driven by little Jack Regis. While she didn't win the Gold Cup that year, she was national point total champ and set new world records for both the mile and kilometer runs on Lake Washington. Also on Lake Washington, Bill Munsey won his first unchallenged Gold Cup. And it seemed like something was missing when no aftermath battle ensued. Then in 1958, Thriftway's domination of the Gold Cup was disrupted as Jack Regis and Hawaii Kai picked up the cup he'd missed the previous season. Meanwhile, a new national point champion was crowned as Miss Bardall, the Green Dragon, made the complete circuit for her colorful owner, industrialist Ole Bardall. For thrills and excitement, it's hard to beat a neck-and-neck hydroplane race. Freewheeling drivers and power-packed water monsters pitted against each other like the Bardall dueling Miss Thriftway in the Diamond Cup of '59.
Time around, Nitrogen was last across the line. As they go into that turn for the first of 5 times around the course, Bardall is on the inside corner, and there we go, Thriftway on the outside corner now as he starts to take Bardall. Munsey is going to the outside. He thinks he can take Bardall on the outside. Now they're dead even coming off the exit buoy at the 2-boat race, and Bardall is lagging back a little on the acceleration as Munsey pours the coal to Miss Thriftway and starts to move away from Bardall. They're halfway up the backstretch in the first of 5 times around the course. Thriftway coming up to the 3/4 mark of the backstretch, closely followed by the Bardall. Then next is Miss Spokane, followed by the Pay and Save, and the Nitrogen is lagging. Now they go to the left-hand side of the course, the first of 5 times around the course. Here's your race for 3rd and 4th, as the boats are buried in the spray out there, going into that far turn up to our left. Munsey in Miss Thriftway at the top part of the left turn, leading by about 2 buoy markers over Miss Bardall, who's coming up hard in the inside corner, and it looks like Munsey might have lost her a little bit coming off the exit buoy, and he loses a little ground to Bardall, who in turn loses a little bit, and that's a red-hot duel still in there, as 4 boats are closely bunched and the Nitrogen is trailing. Down to the 1,000-foot mark comes the Miss Thriftway. It's Bill Munsey at the wheel, closely followed by Jack Regis and the Bardall. Here's the big duel that everybody's been looking for between these 2 top-rated jockeys. At the 1,000-foot mark at the end of lap number 1. Here comes Munsey over the line of Miss Thriftway. Bardall is second. She is 4 seconds behind. Miss Spokane is 3rd. The Miss Pay and Save is 4th, and the Nitrogen will be 5th at the end of the first lap. 105 miles an hour for the first of 5 times around the course. Here is your right turn activity. The Miss Thriftway is leading Bardall by 5 seconds. As we're in the second of 5 times around the course, the Nitrogen is 22 seconds behind the leader at the end of her first lap. Spokane is 7 seconds behind the leader. Here's your battle for first and second going into the left-hand turn in her 4th time around the course. Thriftway leading by 3 seconds over the Bardall. Regis coming up now, giving it the hard drive as Munsey seems to fall off a little bit. And Regis again makes that determined bid in that big corner up there to the left, which you remember Bill Munsey mentioned had a lot of spells in it. Now we have Regis trying to go to the outside. He tried the inside, it didn't work. Now he goes to the outside. Let's see if this works. Munsey comes around, tops down, and Bardall is making a bid now. And Munsey stays ground, staying to the inside, and tries to swing a little bit wide. Now they're virtually dead even, coming off the exit buoy. Virtually dead even now as Bardall begins to make a move. They're dead even as Bardall is picked up for 3 seconds at the 1,000-foot mark. They seem to be virtually even. And once again, the tremendous acceleration of the Miss Thriftway puts her across the line 1/2 second in front of Miss Bardall. Munsey on the inside corner is laying back, and Bardall is driving to take that corner on the right-hand side, 105 miles an hour on her 4th time around. This is the 5th and final lap. Bardol has made up for 3 seconds. Let's see if he can take him on the outside. Muncie took Regis on the outside, but it looks like Muncie's driving him out. Now they come off the exit buoy as Miss Spokane, 19 seconds behind the leader, completes their 4th lap. Bardol goes to the outside corner, and Muncie comes off real hard on that exit buoy in his 5th time around the course. And Bardol dips down. Made his bid in the 3rd and 4th lap. Now he falls back a little bit. The Miss Pay and Save comes across the line. She looks like she's a little bit sick. She's 38 seconds behind the leader at the end of her 4th lap. 3/4 of the way up the backstretch. The Miss Swiftway coming on real hard in the left-hand turn. About 3 seconds behind is the Bardol. They were dead even, or less than a second between the two boats, as Muncie is led from wire to wire. Muncie made a brave bid. Your 3rd place boat is the Miss Spokane, 3/4 of the way up the backstretch. She is some 18 seconds behind the leader as she's in her 5th and final lap. In 4th place is the Miss Pay and Save. Now, as both boats come off the left-hand turn in the battle for 1st and 2nd, Muncie and Miss Swiftway is on the inside corner. Regis and Bardol goes to the outside, and let's see if he can come up on him. He's trying real hard. There's about less than 2 boat lengths. Here comes Regis. He's pouring it on. It's going to be real close. He could take him. He might have caught Muncie by surprise. Regis coming on now, and it's going to be real close. Muncie gets across the line. Bill Muncie and Miss Swiftway gets across the line, less than a boat length in front of Jack Regis in the Miss Bardol.
1959 also saw the revival of the hassles which had plagued the sport since its beginning. The Gold Cup race run on Lake Washington was finally won by cowboy Bill Stead and the Maverick after the points were unscrambled. Jumping of the gun here in the final heat by Norm Evans and Miss Spokane created a dilemma for the officials and confusion for the fans. It certainly didn't help the sport. The bright emotional spot of the 59 season occurred at the President's Cup race on the Potomac. The race was won by Mira Slovak in Bill Boeing's Miss Wahoo, named incidentally after Wahoo, Nebraska, the hometown of Boeing's wife. Slovak has been a popular favorite wherever he's raced and was the subject of a This Is Your Life show originated through King Facilities. Miro had not won too many races, but that 59 President's Cup was the one he wanted most. This was the one which gave him the opportunity to shake hands with President Eisenhower to say thanks for his new life in America. In 1960, the hydro hassles actually brought the sport to a turning point. Here in Seattle, the naming of the Seafair Trophy race winner was delayed for hours while meetings were held, trying to decide whether the race was over, whether there was a winner or not, whether to extend competition to another day. The fans, meanwhile, were virtually forgotten as they milled around for a while on the lakefront and then went home wondering who had won and whether the sport they loved had become hopelessly mired in some sort of athletic bureaucracy. The race itself had lots of excitement. Mira Slovak here escaping death when the Wahoo was demolished. It was a very serious crash. Then later in the race, Donnie Wilson was badly burned as the Miss U.S. caught fire. That's the Miss U.S. And still later, Rush Schley spun out in the Thriftway, too. Ultimately, though, Miss Thriftway won the race on the Monday rerun of the final heat. An emergency flare had thwarted Rex Manchester and Miss Spokane in a bid for their first great victory. The Gold Cup of last year is almost better left unmentioned, as it marked what probably was the low point in modern-day hydroplane racing. The abbreviated affair was marred by one meeting after another as drivers and owners hassled about whether to race or not to race on the choppy waters of Lake Mead, Nevada. But APBA officials knew without doubt that if unlimited hydroplane racing was to continue as a major, vibrant water sport, the rules had to undergo some healthy revision. Now, this Sunday on Lake Washington, we'll see the results of that decision. The 1961 Seafair race will be a 3-event affair for a total of $40,000 in prizes. It's billed as a World's Championship race, and it will be operated under the new rules known as the Dono Plan. Stan Dono, a veteran Seattle race official, was the primary author of the new regulations, which promise some new life for the sport. And basically, the Dono Plan has these key points. First, elimination of a drawing to select competitors in each heat. Time trials will pit the same fastest boats against each other in each heat. Bonus points will be awarded only in the final heat, guaranteeing a fight to the finish. Point 3, the naming of a winner, a definite winner at the end of the race. 4, the elimination of the long delays between heats. And 5, the appointment of a single referee whose decisions will be final. Now, with the rules revamped, The consensus is that, well, things are looking up for hydroplane fans. The future, of course, is unpredictable as usual. But it's for sure that there's more excitement in store for all of us. No doubt there will be other dramatic and hair-raising episodes, such as Bill Muncey's famous tangle with a 40-foot Coast Guard cutter in this, the 1958 Gold Cup event. Now, these films show the action leading up to the fateful crash which sank the cutter and demolished the Miss Thriftway. Here you see the Coast Guardman climbing out of a hole in the boat just in time to get away. How in the world everyone escaped without fatal injury is a question still unanswered. And, Ted, what did you think of that one? Wasn't that one of the most chilling incidents in modern-day hydroplaning?
It sure was. And the miracle was that no one was killed in the crash, and further miracle that the mechanical failure to Miss Thriftway didn't result in a multiple crash of the other boats. The pictures will show that the 5 boats coming around through the turn as they're coming now, and Bill's on the inside. And he will cross in front of each boat, and the Gale 5 goes directly through his goose tail right there. That's how close it was. And the other 2 boats were only missing by very few feet, and there's the crash where he strikes the
bang right into that Coast Guard boat with a tremendous crash. Now, I think we can see here, Ted, by moving the film in the projector frame by frame, you can see just how close those 2 boats came to hitting, and the rest of the business right here.
Right.
You go ahead and take it on through as we sort of move it here frame by frame.
Moving very, very slowly, and right here is where the Gale goes through his rooster tail. You can see him emerge there. Then now he's picking up the next boat, which I believe is Roy Doobie. There he goes in front of the 3rd, and I don't know which boat that was.
And then he hits the Coast Guard cutter.
I usually set up my turns about 500 feet before I get to the entrance buoy of the turn. And when I started to set up for the turn, I noticed I didn't get any reaction to the steering wheel at all, and I knew something must be wrong. So I started to wave frantically at the other drivers, hoping they could see me, that I was in trouble. I'm not ready to quit yet, and I would like to continue racing a little longer.
With the future, there certainly will come new boats. Like the early hydros in 1914, the Liberty-powered Miss Detroits and Miss America, and the My Sin in 1939. Even during the roaring 50s, we've seen some new departures from conventional design. There's the Thriftway 2, Ted Jones' radical cab-over design, which has shown spurts of championship caliber, but has not quite yet lived up to early expectations. Then there was Armand Swenson's, talked about one-pointer, the Miss University District. A spectacular design with space-age characteristics, Swenson's boat never quite made the transition from the drawing board to race potential. Then Lyle Park showed up for the 56 Seafair Trophy race with Miss Skyway, the so-called rubber band boat with 28 belts driving the propeller. While this boat, too, did not prove successful in competition, still it points up the attempts by a growing list of hydro enthusiasts willing to invest their time and money to become active participants in the sport. The best example of this spirit is Bob Gilliam, builder and owner of the 3 Fascination boats, and by golly, he built the first one in the hobby shop at Fort Lewis. Now, on the threshold of a new era, we can expect new designs, new power plants in the unlimiteds of the future. And Ted, just what do you foresee for hydroplanes of the future?
Well, first of all, Rod, I believe that the conventional hydroplanes as we have them today are going to be around for a long time, at least 10 years. Actually, the boats are truly a little bit faster than the drivers can handle them. Here's Bill Muncey going through the mile at 192 miles an hour. Now, he could have gone a little faster if he really had to, but that was sufficient.
So, what about this jet business that Guy Lombardo was talking about earlier?
Well, it's true that they are slow on acceleration, slow on deceleration, and they will come. However, our first step is going to be, I believe, the gas turbine, and then into the full pure jet prior to get the ultimate in speed straight away, as Campbell's boat here.
That's Donald Campbell.
Don
right?
Campbell, yes. He's going through the mile, I believe, down there at Meade, and he's really moving along. However, he's not able to turn it at any speed, and he's not able to accelerate. That's moving right along very, very smoothly, though.
It sure is. Well, new rules, new boats. Still, more new faces in the business. Ron Musson, for instance, the current Bardol driver. And young Billy Shoemaker, the 18-year-old driver who debuted in Cutie just last month. They give promise that the Unlimiteds are ready to go on for maybe another 50 years. As far as Seattle is concerned, well, the last 10 have been crammed with excitement and thrills galore. The men who have made the decade of the Roaring 50s so outstanding have now been enshrined in Seattle's Hydroplane Hall of Fame. They are Jerry Bryant, so active in promoting the slow-mos in the early days, Bill Cantrell, Joe Taggart, and Lou Fagel, a trio of intrepid drivers. Les Staudiker, a Michigan pew manufacturer turned hydro builder. Of course, Ted Jones, top designer in the business and a Gold Cup winning driver. Bill Muncy, one of the winningest of all unlimited drivers, now campaigning in the former Thriftway, appropriately renamed Miss Century 21 in honor of Seattle's upcoming World's Fair. Mike Welch, first crew chief of the slow-mo camp. Stan Dono, veteran official and author of the new rules. Bill Stead, fearless pilot of the Maverick, and Willard Rhodes, the fiery director of the Thriftways. Now, appropriately, this array of hydroplane stars has been named to the Stan Sayers Memorial Hall of Fame in honor of the man who did so much to make the Roaring 50s possible. Next, here's Mrs. Sayers as she attends the first Hall of Fame dinner and accepts the recognition and tribute due her late husband. Sayers, who died in 1956, is shown at an earlier banquet accepting the much sought-after Gold Cup won by his slow-mo team.
After trophy in the world today, a trophy emblematic of the Unlimited Hydroplane Championship of the world, a trophy that we're all very proud of, and we have all learned to love at the Seattle Yacht Club and in Seattle proper. One that will be with us for another year until the green-eyed monster returns. It gives me so much pleasure, Stan, that I am at a loss for adjectives to congratulate you on one of the most marvelous achievements of any sportsman in the world today.
What about the slow-mos themselves? The 5 is now the semi-retired Miss Seattle, aching to run again, but content with 2 Gold Cup wins and a bundle of excitement behind her. As for the slow-motion 4, the gallant old lady is now enshrined in Seattle's Museum of History and Industry, with thousands of fans visit her annually to relive the years when the U-27 raced to victory in 3 Gold Cup events, held the Harmsworth Trophy for 6 years, and for 7 years reigned as the fastest propeller-driven boat in the world. She was the boat whose glimmering rooster tail brought a world championship to Seattle when the town needed a champion. On the Detroit River, she had kindled a flame which became the Roaring 50s. On Lake Washington, her antics brought out the greatest crowds ever assembled for a sports event in the West. This Sunday afternoon, a whole new fleet of Unlimiteds will be vying for a world championship, vying to go down in the record books with the gallant old lady. Once again, the King Broadcasting Company will be on hand to bring you live coverage of this Seafair Trophy race, just as we have for every local race, back to and including the world record run made by the Slow-Mo 4 in 1949. Well, Ted, it's been a pleasure to present the Roaring 50s and to have you with us to talk about
It's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to another decade of this racing.
It's been a recap, of course, of Seattle's first 10 years with the giant hydroplanes, the spills and the thrills, the flips and the flying starts. We think the sport's here to stay, that it's going to get bigger and better, and we plan to be on hand, too, through another decade of thrills unlimited, through another 10 years of excitement just like
The Roaring 50s.